The morning sun cast long shadows across Kensington Palace as 6-year-old Prince Louis pressed his small nose against the cool glass of his bedroom window. Today was different from other days. Today, his father, Prince William, had promised to take him somewhere special, somewhere that held deep meaning for their family. Louis didn't fully understand why his father's voice had trembled slightly when he mentioned their destination, or why his stepmother Catherine had hugged him a little tighter at breakfast. The palace bustling with activity as royal staff prepared for what they called an informal visit. Louis watched the guards in their crisp uniforms moving with purpose through the courtyard below. He recognized some of them. There was Jenkins, who always winked at him during formal ceremonies, and Thompson, who had once secretly shared a biscuit with him during a particularly long state dinner. "Louis, are you ready?" Prince William's voice came from behind him. The young prince turned to see his father standing in the doorway, dressed more casually than usual, but still carrying that unmistakable air of royal dignity. William's eyes held something Louis had noticed more often lately, a distant sadness that seemed to appear whenever certain topics came up in conversation. "Where are we going again, Papa?" Louis asked, though he had heard the answer several times already. Children often need repetition to process important information. And somehow, Louis sensed this trip was more significant than a regular royal engagement. "We're going to see a statue, son. A very special statue of someone who loved you very much, even though she never got to meet you," William explained, kneeling down to Louis's eye level. The prince noticed how his father's hands trembled slightly as he straightened Louis's small jacket. The journey through London was unlike their usual formal processions. Instead of the grand state car with its flags and ceremony, they traveled in a more modest vehicle with just essential security. Louis pressed his face to the window, watching the familiar streets of London pass by. He saw people going about their daily lives, mothers pushing prams, children walking to school, elderly couples feeding pigeons in small parks. "Papa, why do people always look sad when they talk about the lady in the statue?" Louis asked innocently. William felt his throat tighten. How do you explain to a 6-year-old about loss? About a grandmother he would never meet, about a woman whose absence still echoed through their family 27 years later. "Sometimes, Louis, people we love have to go away before we want them to. But when we remember them, when we visit places that remind us of them, it helps us feel close to them again," William said carefully. He had practiced this conversation in his mind countless times, but actually having it proved more difficult than anticipated. As their car approached Kensington Gardens, Louis could see crowds of people gathered in the distance. Even on a regular Tuesday morning, Diana's statue drew visitors from around the world. Some came as tourists, others as mourners, and many simply as people who remembered a woman who had touched their lives through her compassion and humanity. The security team had worked carefully to ensure some privacy for this family moment, but there was no escaping the public nature of their visit. Louis was used to crowds and cameras. They were simply part of his reality as a young royal. But today felt different. Today, the crowd seemed more respectful, more subdued. "Will there be lots of people?" Louis asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. "Yes, but they're there for a good reason. They want to remember someone special, just like we do," William replied. He thought about his own childhood visits to his mother's grave, how the presence of the public had sometimes felt intrusive, but other times had been oddly comforting. These people had loved Diana too, in their own way. As they stepped out of the car, the familiar sounds of royal protocol surrounded them. Security guards took their positions, photographers maintained a respectful distance, and palace staff ensured everything proceeded smoothly. But for Louis, all of this faded into background noise as he caught his first glimpse of the statue. There, standing elegant and serene in the sunken garden that Diana had loved, was the bronze figure of his grandmother. She was surrounded by 3 children, not royal children, but children representing all the young people she had championed throughout her life. The sculptor had captured something essential about Diana's spirit: her warmth, her accessibility, her genuine love for children. Louis stared up at the statue, his small hand unconsciously reaching for his father's. The bronze Diana seemed to be looking directly at him, and for a moment, the 6-year-old felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't quite understanding either. "She's beautiful," Louis whispered, and William felt tears threatening to spill. Through his son's eyes, he was seeing his mother anew, not as the tragic figure from newspaper headlines or the saint-like memory that had grown over the years, but as a woman who would have been a loving grandmother. The gardens around them were filled with Diana's favorite flowers: white roses, forget-me-nots, and sweet peas. The sunken garden had been redesigned to honor her memory, and every plant had been chosen to reflect her taste and her spirit. Louis noticed the flowers, but didn't understand their significance. To him, they were simply pretty decorations around the important statue. A small group of visitors stood nearby, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly moved by the presence of Diana's son and grandson. An elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Louis studying the statue. A young mother lifted her own son to get a better view, whispering to him about the importance of what they were witnessing. "Papa, why doesn't she move?" Louis asked with the pure logic of childhood. William smiled despite his emotions. "Because it's not really her son. It's just a way for us to remember what she looked like, to have a place where we can come and think about her," William explained. Louis nodded seriously, processing this information with the gravity that children sometimes bring to important moments. He walked closer to the statue, his small shoes making soft sounds on the garden path. The bronze Diana seemed to watch over him, just as she would have done in life. The visit was meant to be brief. Royal schedules are always precise, but William found himself reluctant to leave. This was his first time bringing one of his children to see the statue, and the experience was more emotionally complex than he had anticipated. He watched Louis studying every detail of the bronze figure, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of loss and memory. "Could we come back tomorrow?" Louis asked as they finally prepared to leave. "Perhaps," William said, knowing that royal life didn't often allow for such spontaneity, but touched by his son's request. As they walked back toward their car, Louis turned several times to look back at the statue, as if trying to memorize every detail. The journey home was quieter. Louis seemed lost in thought, occasionally asking questions that revealed how much he was trying to understand. William answered each one carefully, aware that these moments were shaping his son's understanding not just of Diana, but of family, loss, and the complex nature of public grief. That evening, as Catherine tucked Louis into bed, he asked, "Will Granny Diana ever come back?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Catherine, who had never met Diana but had felt her presence throughout her marriage to William, chose her words carefully. "No, sweetheart, but the love she had for your papa and the love she would have had for you, that never goes away. It stays with us always." Louis nodded sleepily, satisfied with this explanation in the way that children sometimes are. As he drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was of the beautiful lady in the garden who looked so kind and who everyone said would have loved him very much. 3 weeks had passed since the visit to Diana's statue, and Prince Louis found himself thinking about the bronze lady more often than anyone realized. Children process experiences differently than adults, often returning to significant moments in unexpected ways. During his daily lessons with his private tutor, Louis would sometimes stare out the window toward the direction of Kensington Gardens, wondering if the statue lady was still there, still watching over the flowers. The palace had settled back into its usual rhythm of royal duties and family life. Prince William had returned to his official engagements, Catherine was managing her charitable commitments, and Princess Charlotte and Prince George were focused on their studies. But Louis, the youngest and perhaps most sensitive to the emotional undercurrents around him, seemed different since their visit. "He's been asking a lot of questions," Catherine mentioned to William one evening as they reviewed the children's schedules. They were in William's private study surrounded by family photographs that included several of Diana with young William and Harry. "Yesterday he asked me if statues can hear people when they talk to them." William looked up from the official papers he'd been reviewing. Since becoming heir to the throne, the administrative burden had increased significantly, but family always took precedence. "What did you tell him?" "I said that while statues can't hear like we do, sometimes talking to them helps us feel better," Catherine replied. She had become skilled at navigating these delicate conversations about Diana. As someone who had married into the family, she felt a particular responsibility to help her children understand their heritage while respecting the complexity of their loss. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Nanny Sarah entered, looking slightly concerned. "Your Royal Highnesses? Prince Louis is asking if he can write a letter." When I asked to whom, he said to the lady in the garden. He seems quite determined about it. William and Catherine exchanged glances. They had known that the visit to Diana's statue would have an impact on Louis, but they hadn't anticipated quite this level of engagement. Children often surprise adults with their emotional intelligence and their need to process experiences in their own unique ways. Perhaps we should let him, Catherine suggested. It might help him work through whatever he's feeling. Later that evening, the family gathered in the informal sitting room that had become their favorite space for relaxed time together. Louis sat at a small desk that had once belonged to William as a child, carefully forming letters with a pencil that seemed almost too big for his small hands. His tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a habit he had inherited from his father. "Dear Lady in the Garden," he wrote slowly, occasionally asking for help with spelling. George and Charlotte watched from nearby, curious about their little brother's project but respectful of its apparent importance to him. "What are you saying to her?" Charlotte asked gently. At 9, she was beginning to understand the complexity of their family history, but she also recognized when something mattered deeply to Louis. "I'm telling her about our house and about my toys and about how Papa gets sad sometimes when people talk about her," Louis said matter-of-factly. Children have a remarkable ability to identify emotional truth even when adults try to hide it. The letter, when completed with various spelling assistance from his family, read, "Dear Lady in the Garden, Papa says you would love me if you could meet me. I would love you too. Do you like flowers? I think they are pretty around your statue. Papa gets quiet when people talk about you, but I think you seem nice. I hope you are happy where you are. Love, Louis." William felt his chest tighten as he read his son's words. The innocence and directness of childhood had captured something that years of therapy and royal protocol had sometimes obscured: the simple human reality of loss and love continuing beyond physical presence. "Can we take it to her?" Louis asked, folding the letter carefully. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Catherine said, making a mental note to coordinate with royal security for another visit. 2 days later, the family returned to Kensington Gardens. This time, the visit had been planned with slightly more formality. The palace had informed the press that this would be a private family moment, and photographers maintained a greater distance. The public, who had come to respect the family's need for personal time with Diana's memory, gave them space while still being present. Louis carried his letter in a small envelope that Catherine had helped him address simply to Diana. He walked with more confidence this time, familiar now with the path through the gardens and the sight of the statue. The bronze Diana seemed somehow more welcoming on this second visit, though of course she remained exactly the same. "Where should I put it?" Louis asked, looking around the statue's base for an appropriate place. William knelt beside his son, thinking about all the letters and flowers that people had left for Diana over the years. "How about here, near the flowers? She always loved flowers." As Louis carefully placed his letter among the fresh blooms that were regularly maintained around the statue, a small crowd of visitors watched quietly. An elderly man removed his hat respectfully. A young woman wiped tears from her eyes. A family with children of their own stood silently, teaching their own young ones about respect and remembrance through their behavior. "Do you think she'll read it?" Louis asked, stepping back to admire his placement of the letter. "I think," William said carefully, "that love has a way of reaching people, even when we can't see how." On this visit, Louis spent more time studying the details of the statue. He noticed how Diana's bronze hands were positioned, how her hair seemed to move even though it was made of metal, how her expression seemed both sad and happy at the same time. These are the kinds of observations that children make, seeing beyond the surface to something deeper. "She looks like she wants to hug someone," Louis observed. Charlotte, who had been quietly thoughtful, spoke up. "Papa says she gave the best hugs." "Better than Mama's hugs?" Louis asked with the competitive curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Different," William said diplomatically, though his smile suggested that this was a question that had no wrong answer. As they prepared to leave, Louis turned to one of the security guards, who had been maintaining a discreet distance throughout their visit. The guard, a man named Roberts who had been with the royal family for several years, was someone Louis recognized and trusted. "Mr. Roberts," Louis said in his clear, serious voice, "do you remember the lady this statue is about?" Roberts, surprised to be addressed directly by the young prince, glanced quickly at William for guidance before answering. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. I had the honor of being assigned to her detail on a few occasions. She was a remarkable woman. What was she like? Lewis asked, genuinely curious. Roberts chose his words carefully, aware that his response would be remembered. She was kind, sir. She had a way of making everyone feel important, no matter who they were, and she loved children very much. Louis nodded seriously, filing this information away with everything else he was learning about his grandmother. For him, Diana was becoming a real person through these small details, not just a figure in photographs or a bronze statue in a garden. As they walked back through Kensington Gardens, Louis stopped suddenly and tugged on William's hand. "Papa, will you tell me more stories about Granny Diana when we get home?" "Of course," William replied, realizing that his son's questions represented an opportunity rather than a burden. For too long, discussions about Diana had been fraught with pain and complexity. Lewis's innocent curiosity was opening a door to remembrance that felt healthier and more natural. That evening, after the formal dinner and the bedtime routines, William sat in Lewis's room and shared stories about Diana that he had never told his children before. He talked about how she used to sneak him and Harry extra sweets, how she would play pranks on their royal protection officers, how she could make him laugh even when he was upset about something. Lewis listened with the complete attention that children give to stories that matter to them. He asked questions that revealed how carefully he was constructing his understanding of this grandmother he would never meet, but who was clearly central to his family story. "Do you miss her every day?" Lewis asked as William tucked him in. "Not every day," William answered honestly, "but I miss her in a way that never goes away. It's become part of who I am. Like how I miss my stuffed elephant when it's in the wash, but different?" "Yes," William smiled. "Like that, but different." As Louis settled into sleep, he murmured, "I think I would have liked Granny Diana, and she would have absolutely adored you," William whispered back, though his son was already drifting off to dreams that might now include a kind lady in a garden who gave wonderful hugs and loved flowers and children. The autumn term had begun at the palace, bringing with it a structured routine of lessons, outdoor activities, and family time. Prince Louis had settled into his educational schedule with the focused determination that royal children learn early. His tutors noted that he was bright and curious, but they also observed something new in his behavior, a tendency to ask questions about people who were no longer alive, about how families remember loved ones, and about the difference between statues and photographs. "He's been drawing pictures," his art instructor, Miss Thompson, mentioned during her weekly report to Catherine. "Lovely pictures of gardens and flowers. But he always includes a tall lady standing among them. When I asked him about it, he said it was his garden grandmother." Catherine looked at the drawing Miss Thompson had brought to show her. In the innocent style of a 6-year-old's artwork, she could clearly see Lewis's interpretation of Diana's statue, surrounded by an explosion of colorful flowers. What touched her most was that he had drawn himself in the picture too, standing quite close to the statue figure, holding what appeared to be a letter. "Has he mentioned wanting to visit the statue again?" Catherine asked. "Actually, yes. He asked if we could study garden art and whether that might require a field trip," Miss Thompson replied with a gentle smile. "He's quite persistent when he wants something." That afternoon, during their family tea time, a daily tradition that William insisted upon despite his increasingly demanding schedule, Louis brought up the subject himself. "Mama, Papa, I've been thinking about Granny Diana's statue," he said, spreading jam carefully on his scone with the concentration of someone performing an important task. "What about it, sweetheart?" Catherine encouraged. "Well, I think she might be lonely. There are always people visiting, but they just look at her and then leave. Nobody really talks to her for very long," Lewis explained with the kind of logic that children apply to situations adults might find more complex. George looked up from his homework. "Louis, you know it's just a statue, right? It's not actually Granny Diana." "I know that," Lewis replied with slight irritation at being corrected by his older brother. "But Papa said we can remember people by visiting places that remind us of them. So maybe the statue gets lonely when nobody remembers for long enough." William set down his teacup, struck by his youngest son's interpretation. "What do you think would help with that loneliness? Maybe if we visited more often? And maybe if we brought things she would like?" Lewis suggested. In my drawing, I put lots of flowers because Mr. Roberts said she loved flowers. But maybe she would like other things too. Charlotte, who had been listening while sketching in her notebook, looked up thoughtfully. What kinds of things do you think she would like? Louis considered this seriously. Well, Papa says she loved children, so maybe she would like to hear about children things, like about school, and games and funny stories. That's a lovely idea, Catherine said, though she was mentally calculating the logistics of more frequent visits to such a public place. Could we maybe have a picnic near her statue? Lewis continued, warming to his theme. Not right next to it, because that wouldn't be respectful, but close enough so she could hear us having fun. William felt that familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever his children said something that perfectly captured Diana's spirit without realizing it. She would have loved the idea of children having picnics in her memory. She would have found it much more meaningful than formal ceremonies or solemn tributes. I think, William said slowly, that might be exactly what she would want. The planning for what came to be called Louis's Garden Picnic required delicate coordination between royal protocol, security requirements, and a 6-year-old's vision of appropriate tribute. The palace staff worked with Kensington Gardens management to identify a suitable location that would allow the family privacy while maintaining public access to the statue itself. On a crisp October afternoon, the Wales family arrived at Kensington Gardens with a picnic basket, blankets, and Louis carrying a new letter he had written. This one was longer than his first attempt and included updates about his lessons, his siblings, and a detailed description of his favorite toy airplane. The area around Diana's statue had been subtly secured, but in a way that didn't interfere with normal public access. Visitors could still view the memorial, but the family had a quiet space nearby where they could spread their blankets and unpack their simple meal. Lewis had insisted on helping Catherine prepare the sandwiches, arguing that Granny Diana should know that I can help in the kitchen. The result was a slightly lopsided stack of cucumber sandwiches that he regarded with enormous pride. Where should we put the blanket? Lewis asked, surveying the available space with the seriousness of someone planning an important event. How about here? William suggested, indicating a spot that was close enough to see the statue clearly, but far enough away to respect the solemnity of the memorial. As they settled onto their blanket, Louis immediately positioned himself so he could see Diana's bronze face. I want to make sure she knows we're here, he explained. The picnic itself was delightfully normal, children arguing about sandwich fillings, George attempting to teach Charlotte a card game, Louis spilling juice on himself and needing help cleaning up, but it took place under the gentle bronze gaze of Diana's statue, creating a unique combination of everyday family life and memorial tribute. Tell us about when Granny Diana was little, Lewis requested as they shared apple slices. William began to share stories his own grandmother had told him about Diana's childhood, how she loved dancing, how she once broke her arm falling out of a tree, how she always wanted to help take care of other people. She sounds like she was fun, Charlotte observed. She was, William confirmed. She could be very silly sometimes. She used to chase Uncle Harry and me around the palace making monster noises. Like this? Louis asked, making his own version of a monster sound that was more giggle than growl. Exactly like that, William laughed, and for a moment the shadow of loss that often accompanied discussions of Diana lifted into something warmer and more alive. As they ate, a steady stream of visitors passed by the statue. Some were tourists, easily identified by their cameras and guidebooks. Others were clearly people who remembered Diana personally. They moved more slowly, spent longer reading the inscription, and often left flowers or small tokens. Lewis watched these visitors with great interest. Why do people cry when they look at her? He asked. Because they loved her and they miss her, Catherine explained gently. But they look happy too sometimes, Louis observed with the sharp perception of childhood. That's because love doesn't go away just because someone isn't here anymore, William said. When we remember good things about people we love, it can make us feel sad and happy at the same time. As if to illustrate this point, an elderly woman approached the statue, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. She moved carefully, as if her joints pained her, and when she reached the memorial, she stood quietly for several minutes before placing her flowers among the others. Louis watched this ritual with fascination. When the woman began to walk away, he surprised everyone by calling out, "Excuse me, lady." The woman turned, startled to be addressed by what was clearly a royal child having a picnic. "Did you know my Granny Diana?" Lewis asked with characteristic directness. The woman's eyes widened as she realized who she was talking to. She glanced quickly at William and Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. "I worked at the hospital where she used to visit," the woman said gently. "She was very kind to all of us." "What was your favorite thing about her?" Lewis asked, genuinely curious. The woman thought for a moment. She remembered everyone's names, even people like me who just cleaned the floors. She would always stop and ask about my family. Lewis nodded seriously, adding this information to his growing understanding of his grandmother. "Thank you for telling me," he said politely, "and thank you for bringing her flowers." As the woman walked away, clearly moved by the encounter, Catherine marveled at her youngest son's natural ability to connect with people. It was a gift that Diana had possessed in abundance, this capacity to make others feel seen and valued. "That was very nice of you, Lewis," William said. "I wanted to know more about her," Lewis replied simply. "And I think that lady wanted someone to know that she remembers Granny Diana, too." The afternoon continued peacefully. George and Charlotte played a quiet game of football on the nearby grass while Louis alternated between eating his picnic and studying the statue. He seemed to be memorizing details, the way Diana's bronze hands were positioned, how the sculptor had captured the flow of her hair, the expression that managed to convey both strength and gentleness. "I think she likes having us here," Louis announced after a particularly long period of thoughtful observation. "What makes you think that?" Catherine asked. "She looks happy," Lewis said confidently. "Not sad like in some of the pictures at home." As the sun began to set and it came time to pack up their picnic, Louis approached the statue one more time. He placed his newest letter carefully among the flowers and stood quietly for a moment. "See you soon, Granny Diana," he said softly. "Thank you for listening to our picnic." Walking back through Kensington Gardens as the autumn light faded, Lewis skipped ahead of his family, clearly pleased with how the afternoon had gone. His simple idea of spending time near Diana's statue had created something meaningful for all of them, a way of honoring her memory that felt natural and warm, rather than formal and distant. "Can we do this again?" Louis asked as they reached their car. "I think we can," William replied, realizing that his youngest son had found a way to make Diana's memory part of their ongoing family life rather than just a source of sadness. It was exactly what she would have wanted. Winter had settled over London, transforming Kensington Gardens into a landscape of bare branches and frost-covered paths. The regular visits to Diana's statue had become a cherished family tradition, though the cold weather required more careful planning and warmer clothing. Prince Louis had developed what Catherine privately called his statue outfit, a thick blue coat, matching hat, and sturdy boots that could handle the sometimes muddy garden paths. 3 months had passed since their first visit, and the change in Louis was remarkable. What had begun as curiosity about his grandmother had evolved into something deeper, a sense of connection that seemed to give him comfort and confidence. His teachers noted that he spoke more freely about family history, asked thoughtful questions about royal responsibility, and showed unusual empathy for others who had experienced loss. "He asked me yesterday if I missed my grandmother," Miss Thompson, his art instructor, reported to Catherine. "When I said yes, he told me that missing people is like carrying love in a special place in your heart." "That's quite sophisticated thinking for a 6-year-old. Catherine smiled, recognizing William's influence in Louis's words, but also seeing something uniquely Louis in the way he processed and shared these concepts. The December visit was particularly special because Louis had decided he wanted to bring Christmas decorations for Diana's statue. This required careful negotiation with garden management and security, but eventually it was agreed that a small, tasteful wreath could be placed temporarily near the memorial. She should have Christmas too, Louis had argued with unshakable logic. Everyone should have Christmas. The wreath Louis chose was simple but beautiful. Evergreen branches woven with white ribbons and small silver bells that chimed softly in the winter wind. He had helped Catherine select it from the palace's Christmas supplies, rejecting more elaborate options in favor of something that looks like Granny Diana would like it. On the appointed day, the family made their way through the winter gardens, bundled against the cold. The statue stood serene and unchanging, though frost had gathered in the folds of Diana's bronze clothing, giving her an ethereal, almost magical appearance. "She looks cold," Louis observed, his breath making small clouds in the frosty air. Statues don't get cold, George pointed out with the practicality of an older brother. But if she could, she would be, Louis replied, unwilling to abandon his empathetic interpretation. As Louis carefully placed the wreath near the statue's base, a small group of visitors gathered at a respectful distance. Word had spread through social media that the royal family made regular visits to Diana's memorial, and people often hoped to witness these moments of family remembrance. Among today's visitors was a young mother with a daughter approximately Louis's age. The little girl watched with fascination as Louis arranged the wreath with careful precision, occasionally stepping back to assess his work from different angles. "Mummy," the girl said in a voice that carried clearly in the still winter air, "why is that boy putting Christmas things by the statue lady?" "Because he loved her, and he wants her to have Christmas too," her mother replied gently. Louis overheard this exchange and turned toward the little girl with a smile. "Do you know about the statue lady?" he asked. The girl's mother looked startled, realizing her daughter was now in conversation with a member of the royal family. "A little bit," the girl replied shyly. "She was my granny," Louis said proudly. "She died before I was born, but everyone says she would have loved me very much." "My granny died too," the little girl said quietly. "Mummy says she's watching over me." "Maybe they're friends now," Louis suggested with the hopeful certainty of childhood. "Maybe they're watching over both of us together." William and Catherine exchanged glances, moved by their son's natural ability to connect with others through shared experience. This was Diana's gift, the capacity to find common ground, to make people feel less alone in their struggles. The little girl's mother, clearly emotional, thanked Louis for his kindness before they moved on. But the brief encounter had given Louis an idea that would occupy his thoughts for the rest of the visit. "Papa," he said as they walked slowly around the memorial garden, "do you think other children miss people they never got to meet?" "I think many children do," William replied carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because maybe they would like to visit Granny Diana's statue too. Maybe they would like to know that missing someone is okay, and that love doesn't go away, even when people do." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Her youngest son was articulating something profound about grief, loss, and the healing power of shared remembrance. "What are you thinking, Louis?" she asked gently. "Well," Louis said, clearly working through an idea. "What if we had a special day where children who miss people could come and put flowers by the statue? Not just for Granny Diana, but for everyone they miss. And we could tell them that it's okay to feel sad and happy at the same time." William stopped walking and knelt down to his son's eye level. "That's a beautiful idea, Louis. But it would need a lot of organizing. Could we ask the people who take care of the garden, and maybe some of the people who work at the palace?" Louis asked hopefully. The conversation continued as they completed their circuit of the memorial garden. Louis's enthusiasm for his idea was infectious, and gradually the whole family began contributing suggestions for how such an event might work. "We could call it Louis's Remembrance Garden Party," Charlotte suggested. "No," Louis said firmly. "It should be Granny Diana's Remembrance Garden Party. She's the one who would want to help children feel better." By the time they returned home, Louis's idea had evolved into a genuine proposal. That evening, William found himself in the unusual position of discussing event planning with his 6-year-old son, who had surprisingly detailed thoughts about logistics. "It shouldn't be too formal," Louis insisted. "Children don't like formal things, but it should be special enough that people know it's important." "What would you want to happen at this garden party?" Catherine asked. "Well, children could bring flowers or pictures or letters for people they miss, and someone could read stories about how love continues even when people go away. And maybe we could have sandwiches because picnics make everything better." William thought about his own childhood grief, how isolated and formal it had often felt. Louis's instinct toward inclusion and normalcy was exactly what Diana would have supported. "I think," William said slowly, "that we should talk to the palace staff about this. It might be something we could actually do." Louis's face lit up with joy. "Really? We could really have a party for children who miss people?" "It would take time to organize properly," Catherine warned, "and we'd have to make sure it was done respectfully." "I can wait," Louis said seriously. Good parties are worth waiting for. Over the following weeks, Lewis's idea began to take shape with the help of palace staff, Kensington Gardens management, and various charitable organizations that worked with grieving children. What started as a 6-year-old's impulse toward empathy was developing into a meaningful event that could serve families dealing with loss. He's quite persistent when he believes in something, one palace aide mentioned to Catherine during a planning meeting. He keeps asking for updates on Granny Diana's party. Louis himself became deeply involved in the planning process, offering opinions on everything, from the type of flowers that should be available to the best time of day for the event. His suggestions often surprised the adults with their thoughtfulness and practicality. "We should have somewhere for people to wash their hands after they put flowers down," he pointed out during one meeting. "And maybe tissues, because sometimes people cry and that's okay." As winter progressed towards spring, the family continued their regular visits to Diana's statue. Each time, Louis would update her on the progress of the planning, speaking to the bronze figure as naturally as if she were sitting beside him. "We're going to have music, but not sad music," he told the statue during their February visit. "Happy music that makes people remember good things. And Papa says there might be face painting, which I think you would like because you liked fun things." These one-sided conversations had become a natural part of their visits. William no longer worried about Louis talking to the statue. Instead, he recognized it as his son's way of processing his thoughts and feelings about family, loss, and love. "Do you think she hears him?" Catherine asked William quietly during one visit as they watched Louis earnestly explaining his latest ideas to Diana's bronze form. "I think," William replied, "that love has a way of reaching where it needs to go." As spring approached, and the date for Granny Diana's Remembrance Garden party was finalized, Louis's excitement was infectious throughout the household. Staff members found themselves looking forward to the event, caught up in a 6-year-old's vision of healing and community. "You know," one of the senior advisors mentioned to William, "this might be exactly the kind of thing Diana would have organized herself if she were here." William smiled, watching his youngest son practice his speech for the garden party. A speech about how missing people is part of loving them, and how sharing that feeling with others makes it less heavy to carry. "Yes," he agreed. "I think it's exactly what she would have done." The first Saturday in May dawned clear and bright, with the kind of gentle spring weather that seemed designed for garden parties. Prince Louis woke early, his excitement about Granny Diana's Remembrance Garden party having made sleep difficult the night before. He had practiced his welcome speech so many times that Catherine could recite it along with him, and he had personally inspected every detail of the preparations with the thoroughness of a professional event coordinator. "Is it time yet?" Louis asked for the 5th time that morning, already dressed in his carefully chosen outfit. A smart but not overly formal combination that he felt struck the right balance between respecting the occasion and being approachable to the children who would attend. "Almost," William replied, adjusting his own clothing with nervous energy he hadn't expected to feel. The event had grown beyond Louis's original simple vision into something significant. Over 50 families had registered to attend, and the story had captured public attention in a way that surprised everyone involved. The transformation of the memorial garden was subtle but beautiful. Kensington Gardens staff had worked with palace event coordinators to create spaces where children could participate in various activities while maintaining the dignity of Diana's memorial. Tables were set up with art supplies where children could create memory cards or draw pictures. A small area was designated for the flower ceremony that would be the heart of the event. And yes, there were sandwiches, lots of them, because Louis had insisted that no proper gathering could take place without adequate refreshments. As the Wales family arrived at the gardens, they could see that the early attendees were already there. The sight that greeted them was both heartwarming and poignant. Children of various ages with their families, many carrying flowers, drawings, or photographs. Some children clung shyly to their parents, while others seemed eager to participate in something they sensed was important. "There are more people than I thought there would be," Louis said with a mixture of excitement and sudden nervousness. "Does that worry you?" Catherine asked gently. "No," Louis replied after thinking about it. "It means lots of children needed this." "That's good." The first family Louis met was particularly memorable. A girl about his own age named Emma had come with her grandmother, carrying a photo of her parents who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Emma was quiet and serious, but when Louis approached her and introduced himself, she relaxed enough to show him her picture. "They look nice," Louis said, studying the photograph with genuine interest. "Do you miss them a lot?" "Every day," Emma replied simply. "I miss my Granny Diana every day too, even though I never met her," Louis said. "But my papa says that means we loved them very much, and love is always good even when it makes us sad." This conversation, overheard by nearby families, seemed to set the tone for the entire event. Children began talking more freely about the people they had come to remember, and parents found themselves able to discuss loss in a way that felt natural rather than forced. The flower ceremony itself was surprisingly moving. Louis had planned for each child to place a flower at Diana's statue while thinking about their own loved one. What he hadn't anticipated was how this simple act would create a sense of shared experience among the participants. "When you put your flower down," Louis announced to the gathered families, "you can say the name of the person you're remembering, or you can just think about them quietly. Both ways are good." As child after child approached the statue, the memorial garden filled with whispered names and soft tears. But there was something healing about the communal nature of the remembrance. Children who had felt alone in their grief saw that others shared similar feelings. Louis went last, carrying a white rose for Diana, and speaking clearly enough for everyone to hear, "This is for my Granny Diana, who I never got to meet but who I love anyway. And it's also for all the people that everyone here loves and misses. Thank you for watching over all of us." The moment that would later be captured in dozens of photographs and remembered by everyone present occurred as Louis stepped back from placing his flower. He turned slightly, and for a brief instant appeared to be looking directly into Diana's bronze face. In that moment, surrounded by children who had come to honor their own losses, he seemed to embody everything Diana had represented: compassion, hope, and the belief that love transcends physical absence. "Mummy, is that you?" Louis whispered, so quietly that only the security guard standing nearest to him heard the words. The guard, a man named Thompson who had been with the royal family for over a decade, later told his colleagues that he had never seen anything more touching than the sight of Diana's grandson speaking to her statue as naturally as if she were standing there in person. The art activity that followed allowed children to express their feelings in ways that words sometimes couldn't capture. The drawings created that day ranged from simple stick figures representing lost family members to elaborate gardens filled with flowers and butterflies. Louis moved among the young artists, offering encouragement and sharing his own drawing, a picture of Diana's statue surrounded by all the children who had come to visit her. "She has lots of friends now," Louis explained to anyone who asked about his artwork. "I think she likes that." The lunch portion of the event turned out to be as important as the formal remembrance activities. Children who had been shy earlier began playing together, finding common ground in playground games and shared interests. Parents connected with other families who understood their experiences in ways that friends and extended families sometimes couldn't. One mother, whose son had been struggling with the death of his younger sister, mentioned to Catherine how much the event meant to their family. "He's been so angry about losing her," she said, watching her son play happily with other children. "But seeing that other kids miss people too, and that it's okay to talk about it, I think it's helping him realize he's not alone." As the afternoon progressed, several spontaneous moments occurred that no amount of planning could have created. A group of children began singing a song about butterflies that one of them remembered from their lost grandmother. Others started a game of football that somehow became a tribute to a father who had loved sports. These organic expressions of memory and joy captured exactly what Louis had envisioned: a celebration of love that continues beyond physical presence. "This is better than I thought it would be," Louis confided to William during a quiet moment. "Everyone seems less sad than when they came." "Do you know why that is?" William asked. Louis considered this seriously. "Because when you share sad things, they get smaller, and when you share happy memories, they get bigger." As the event drew to a close, many families lingered, reluctant to end an experience that had provided such unexpected comfort. Children exchanged contact information with new friends, and parents made plans for future meetups. What had started as a single afternoon had created a community of families connected by loss but strengthened by shared understanding. The final moments of the garden party were quiet and reflective. As families gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Each child had the opportunity to place one last flower at Diana's statue, this time not for their own loved one, but as a thank you for the day itself. Louis, watching this spontaneous gesture unfold, felt a satisfaction that was mature beyond his years. His simple idea had grown into something that helped people, and he understood instinctively that this was what royal responsibility could look like, using position and privilege to serve others in meaningful ways. "Will we do this again next year?" asked Emma, the girl whose parents had died in the car accident. "Would you like to?"
Louis replied,
"Yes, please. I think my mom and dad would like knowing that other children think about people they miss too." As the last families departed and the cleanup began, Louis took one final walk around Diana's statue. The memorial was now surrounded by dozens of flowers placed by children who had come to honor their own losses, but had ended up honoring Diana's memory as well. "I think today was good, Granny Diana," Louis said quietly to the bronze figure. "I think you would have liked meeting all those children. They were brave for talking about missing people, and you always liked brave children." William, watching his son from a nearby bench, felt a profound sense of peace. In organizing this event, Louis had found a way to transform his own feelings of loss into something healing for others. It was exactly the kind of legacy Diana would have wanted. Not solemn monuments, but living expressions of love and service. "Ready to go home?" Catherine asked as she joined them near the statue. "Almost," Louis replied. "I just want to remember everything about today so I can tell Granny Diana about it next time we visit." As they walked back through Kensington Gardens, Louis skipped ahead occasionally but kept looking back to make sure Diana's statue was still visible. The first Granny Diana's Remembrance Garden Party had been everything he had hoped it would be. A day when children who missed people came together and discovered that love, memory, and hope were stronger than sadness when shared with others.
"Papa," Louis said as they reached their car, "I think Granny Diana was here today."
Not her statue, but really her. "Did you feel it too?" William smiled, remembering his mother's laugh, her warmth, her absolute conviction that children deserve to be heard and valued.
"Yes, Louis."
"I think she was here too." That night, as Louis settled into bed, he was already planning improvements for next year's garden party. But his final thought before sleep was simpler and more immediate. Gratitude for a grandmother he had never met, but who had somehow guided him toward understanding that the best way to honor people we love is to love others in their memory. The bronze statue remained in its garden, unchanged by the day's events, but somehow enriched by the love and remembrance that had surrounded it. And in the weeks that followed, staff members at Kensington Gardens reported an increase in visitors, families who had heard about the garden party and wanted to experience their own moments of connection with Diana's enduring legacy of compassion and service to others.